I haven't seen the red button yet.
Okay. So thank you for coming. We have a renowned scholar, Professor Katie Bailey. Am I correctly pronouncing your name?
Yeah,
and
perfect.
Julie Davis is our associate editor. Okay. Okay. So why don't you introduce yourself briefly, please? Mm-hmm.
So I'm Katie Bailey, and I'm Professor of Work and Employment at King's Business School, and I'm also head of the HRM and Employment Relations Group.
Great, great. So now congratulations again. You're one of the 2 best paper awardees. Surprisingly, I mean, interestingly, the 2 winners, the 2 team winners, they are from the UK. So I think you are definitely strong in producing review articles and theoretical and conceptual papers. Congratulations. So we are here actually to learn from you and your team, okay? Because the topic is important and the way you wrote the review article is something we have to learn, okay? So here are some of the questions, and then Dr. Julie Davis will chime in whenever she needs, okay? So I'm just curious about why you have been interested in conducting research on this particular topic, meaningfulness of work.
Thank you, Yonjoo. And just first of all, please can I say on behalf of my co-authors as well, thank you so much for this amazing award. It's so prestigious. We're so excited and honoured to have been given the award. So we're delighted. Thank you so much. So I was interested in meaningful work for about 15 years now. I was doing some research on employee engagement, which I was very enjoying. I had a series of linked projects. And one of the things that I discovered about engagement at that time, based on the work of William Kahn, was that meaningfulness is a key antecedent condition for employee engagement levels. And this made me very curious because there hasn't been a huge amount written, or there hadn't at that time, about meaningful work within the broader management literature. So I was really curious to see what was happening, what is this meaningfulness, how do we know when a job is meaningful, and what are the mechanisms by which meaningful work does drive up levels of engagement. We have William Kahn's seminal paper on the topic, but after him, we had a bit of a gap really in terms of interest in meaningfulness, and the engagement literature went off in a slightly different direction with the work of the Utrecht group and the focus on job demands and resources. So I was really interested to find out more about meaningfulness, and that really has led me onto a series of projects that have focused on meaningful work over the past 15 years. So that's really the background, Yonjoo.
So can you tell us more about how your original thought has evolved to just current state of your research? Was there any change, or how has your topic evolved?
Yes, so I think when we were doing the review paper, we charted back the development of the whole literature on meaningful work to see what's happened, how's it evolved over the years. And it was pretty clear to us that originally this whole idea came from the work of Hackman and Oldham back in the 1970s, where they looked at experience meaningfulness as one of the critical psychological states that is an antecedent to motivation. It was very much along those lines that the work of people like William Kahn and May and colleagues then subsequently developed in the 1990s, early 2000s. But there was a big gap between when Hackman and Oldham were working and then when those ideas were then picked up by Kahn and so on. But what we've seen in recent years, and I don't know if you've noticed this as well, there's been a huge increase in interest in meaningful work. So we've seen an enormous number of papers being published, and we've been seeing also the integration of different subject specialisms into the whole debate about meaningfulness. So contributions from the spirituality literature, the careers literature, we're seeing the influence of the humanities, the political theory literature. It's a whole range of different theoretical bodies have really come to bear, and we've seen a significant evolution in the ways in which meaningfulness has been conceptualized and theorized over that period of time.
So one of the things I thought really interesting, you were comparing, contrasting the meaningful of work with meaning of work. So how the two differ? Can you make it clear about that?
Yes, well, you know, this is a really interesting question, and it's one we often still discuss and debate. The way I sort of think about it, and others may have a different view, is that meaningful work is work of a particular type. It's work that, however we define meaningful work, is meaningful in some way to us. It's full of meaning, and a lot to be said about how we define meaningful work. The meaning of work is a more plural construct. So work can mean all sorts of different things to us. It can mean, for example, that it's our source of income. It can mean some enjoyment. It can mean a sense of connectivity with our colleagues. It can mean all sorts of different things, but meaningful is something qualitatively different. And I mentioned before, it's been defined in a number of different ways.
So, so what is your major message you want to convey from this review article?
Well, I think that there are three main things that we hope to do in the review article. The first is we really aim to set out the stall of what do we know about meaningful work. So we looked at the theories that have been used to understand it. We looked at some of the ways in which it's been conceptualized. We looked at some of the antecedents, some of the correlates and the outcomes of meaningful work. We're really focusing down on the empirical studies. We didn't set the theoretical issue completely to one side, but our main focus was on the empirical knowledge base that we have today. So that's our first contribution, I think, through the review. We wanted to set out what we know. The second thing we set out to do was to really identify what the core questions are that still remain unanswered in the field. So based on what we know, what is it that we just don't understand enough about? So we see a number of areas where we think that research could really be beneficial moving forward in the field. And I think the other thing I think we really wanted to do was to raise awareness of the whole topic of meaningful work for scholars, particularly in the HRD context, perhaps not have considered it before, and to try and inspire colleagues to come forward with their own research in the area. So that I think what we were trying to do with the review.
Yeah. So the common outcomes of review article basically the future research agenda and as well as implications for practice. So can you tell us about what are the future research agenda and implications for practice?
Okay, so in terms of the future research agenda, I think we felt that there's still plenty of scope for more research that aims to define and create clarity around what meaningful work actually means. We talked a little bit about this earlier on, but so for example, we found that most of the literature has come from the positive psychology field. And we found, in fact, as many as 28 different scales that have been used in studies to measure meaningful work. Now, on the one hand, that's a good thing because it indicates that there's lots of debate going on, lots of different ways of conceptualizing it. But by the same token, it also means that it's difficult to put those findings together and really be clear about what the literature is telling us. So one of the things we think more research is needed on is this whole issue of defining the conceptual space of meaningful work and developing new ways of measuring it. I think another thing that we felt was kind of lacking as well was a sort of a clear sense of what some of the negative sides or the more the dark side of meaningful work. There's been a few papers that have been published since then that have touched on this whole side of, what are the downsides of finding your work meaningful? But we still think that there's room for more research in that area. So can you have too much meaning in your work? I mean, if you do, what does that mean? Can you have too much meaning in certain areas and not enough in others? And how do you offset that? What's the ideal balance? So were some of the things where we felt that there was some more research needed. Now, I'm sorry, you asked me a second question, which I've now forgotten since you asked it.
Implications for practice, particularly focusing on HRD, perhaps?
Sure. I mean, focusing on HRD in particular, I would say that what the studies really brought to light is that high levels of meaningfulness, however you might want to conceptualize and measure that, are beneficial for employees with the caveats that we've already talked about. So one of the implications for HRD is to think about how do we go about raising the opportunity for people to experience their work as highly meaningful. Struck the other day, I read a study that said that it is from America that said that after the current COVID crisis is over, around 41% of American employees are thinking of quitting their job to go and find more meaningful work. I think that raises a big challenge as well for the HRD profession in terms of the retention of employees, the training, the career development and so on around this whole concept of meaningful work. Another implication for practice is the idea of thinking about how does your work meaningfulness at the individual level, how does that relate to the purpose, the overarching purpose of the organization, where it's going, and how do you create those links effectively in an authentic way, not an inauthentic way, to ensure that people are able to surface those feelings of meaningfulness. So I think a few of the implications for practitioners.
It's very clear. But one more following up question, because many of the doctoral students and junior faculty will take a look at this interview to learn something important. One of the things they are struggling in the beginning of their research, what review method they have to or they can use. I think you use the systematic literature review method. So how would you tell us about what review method will be really good, appropriate to conduct research on the topic or similar topics?
Sure. Well, I can answer this with two hats on because as you probably know, I'm co-editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Management Reviews as well. So obviously I spend a lot of time looking at review articles myself and evaluating them. And one of the things that really strikes me is that there are many different ways you can do reviews. There's no one best way. I mean, as I said before, we were very honoured to have won this prize. Our review was what we've called a narrative evidence synthesis. So in other words, we've drawn from the empirical research. We haven't, as I mentioned earlier, we've taken account of the theoretical framing of the topic, but we've focused on the empirical literature. What do we know about this? And I think in doing this type of review, it's very important to follow a very structured approach so that your review is replicable and transparent. So that in the paper, we set out the various stages that involves, but it entails, for example, having a very clear research question, making sure you do a structured search of the literature to capture as many papers as you possibly can. So to do that, you have to have a very robust search string of terms that you're using to look at the literature. And then you need a mechanism to cope with the huge number of papers that you're going to find. Every review that I read says, well, you know, we found 20,000 papers or something relevant for our topic. And you've got to have a really good way of narrowing that right down to something that's manageable, which could be anything from maybe 50 to 200 articles that make your ultimate analysis. And you could narrow down, for example, by the time you've got rid of all your duplicates, you could filter out things that aren't peer reviewed, you could filter out conference papers, you could filter out maybe on the basis of time of publication, language. But each of these decisions that you make is going to have an impact on the shape and of your review and the conclusion you're able to draw. So it's important to think through very carefully what those exclusion criteria are. And then I think it's a question of making sure that you've worked through very thoroughly the implications for each section of your review findings. You know, what exactly are the key points that the authors in the articles are making, and what does this tell us about the field? What does it tell us about what we still don't know? So that's the way we did it. There are many other approaches that are used, structured literature reviews that use the theoretical as well as the empirical literature. We see a lot of bibliometric analyses coming now, co-citation analyses. all of these methods can equally have something important to contribute.
Mm-hmm.
I think the only thing that I would say, certainly with my editor hat on, is that it's important to go beyond just summarizing what the research says. You've got to add something over and above that, some new insights into what the review tells you.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those are the key points.
Okay, thank you. Julie, you have a question, right?
Yes, Katie, I was just wondering the actual process amongst you and your 4 co-authors, how you came to construct the paper over time. You could give some insights.
Sure. I mean, I think that this is a very interesting and important question. If I think back to how we constructed the paper, how we all worked together, I think it went through a number of different phases. I mean, we started off by developing our research questions together, and in fact, we consulted external experts as well while we were doing that. Then I think we had a doctoral student working with us at one point as well, helping to source all the materials. We developed the search string in an iterative process, and that is such an important part of doing a review, is getting that search string correct. And we went through a number of different iterations, and we worked on that as a team to get that right. Then the actual running of it across all the various databases that we included, I think we had some doctoral students who helped with that, and Gary Kerridge, who was part of the author team, he played a lead role in that process as well. So we then ended up with all the papers that I can't remember how many we had, I think it was a couple of hundred that we had to narrow down from. And within the team, we then, each person looked at a certain number of papers. Each paper was looked at by at least 2 members of the team to decide whether to include or exclude. And we were all involved in that process. And then through various rounds of looking at all of that, we then ended up with our final batch of papers that we were agreed that we were going to include. And we then divided up the writing of the findings sections, so we each took one section of that. So for example, one person took antecedents and one person would maybe take outcomes and so on. So we divided up that section. And then we sat down as a team, we looked at what we'd got, we looked at our research questions, how we'd done it, what our findings were, and thought then about what are the key messages that we want to extract from this. And then I took the lead on actually putting the whole paper together with the introduction and the abstract and then the discussion, and everybody then had a say in what the final paper pretty much looked like. And of course, we can't forget our editor and reviewers as well.
Of course.
I mean, they played an important role in giving us advice and guidance on how to shape up the final paper. So, you know, their credit very much due to them as well. They pushed us to think quite hard about how the paper was relevant to the HRD community. And we learned a lot through that process as well in terms of shaping it and making it relevant. So I think that's how the process worked for us at any rate.
That's great.
Katie, this is going to be my last question. So what do you do as a perhaps scholar practitioner? We have to have a different hats, strong researcher, but at the same time, you have to do something to change the research community, contribute to the research community, and change society, right? So what do you do in a practice level? I think you are directing Meaning and Purpose Network. Still, are you directing the network?
Yeah, so in terms of practice, yes, I set up this network called MapNet, which is the King's Business School Meaning and Purpose Network. So this is a group of organisations, and we've grown over time, and we get together. COVID has obviously had a bit of a negative impact on all of this, as it has on everything else. But we've been getting together quarterly. We've been doing listening to case studies, having inputs from various academic experts in the field. And that's been going really well, and sort of branching out from that, I'm collaborating with one of the members of the network. We're doing a collaborative PhD studentship. So we have a PhD student who's co-funded by King's College and by this large engineering firm, and she's going to be looking at meaning and purpose at work. So we're excited to be working on that. Also working with another member of the network, a large multinational sort of conglomerate type firm with lots of different divisions, looking at, you know, organizational purpose and meaning with them as well, hoping that that will generate both academic and practitioner oriented outputs. As you may be aware as well that, you know, I've written papers for the Sloan Management Review on meaningful work, which is another way of reaching a practitioner audience. Together with my colleagues, we published the Oxford Handbook of Meaningful Work, which was more of an academic publication, but nevertheless, I think is of interest to practitioners as well. I also run workshops and masterclasses on meaningful work and purpose for organizations of various types as well, which gives me a sort of a good grounding in some of the practical issues that organizations are facing.
Yeah, I think what you're doing, this topic is really, not only it is interdisciplinary, but also it's kind of a bridging the gap between research and practice. Okay, so we look forward to reading your either research articles, but at the same time articles for practice and practitioners. Okay, so thank you very much for your time and insights and a great summary and pinpointing the importance and significance of the article. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks very much. Bye.
Stay, please.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.